Yeah, let's talk about the history on willow bark. So it's been used for thousands of years. So even back in the Egyptian time, it was used to decrease fevers. It was used during the Greek time to decrease pain and inflammation. And then the Native Americans used it for all those things, fevers, inflammation, decrease certain blood disorders. So they used it for all kinds of different things during that time. So the ancient civilizations knew about how great willow bark is well before we had any science behind it. So it was first Dr. Hoffman, a chemist, came up with the idea of creating a drug for Bayer called aspirin. So what he did is he found out the specific chemical found in willow's bark called salicin. It's a salicylate, and he took that and he just changed its nature, added an acetyl group to it, calling it acetylsalicylate. And that is what created probably one of the most famous drugs of all time is aspirin. So one of the drugs we use the most in our civilization now actually is a purely natural product. And the more you dive into drugs in general, a lot of them come from herbs, but this was one of the first ones ever made. So why do certain chemists or pharmacists change a certain natural substance into a more unnatural substance? Big reason is they manipulate it to either make it most of the time more absorbable or maybe better on the gut, and it doesn't tend to cause as much digestive side effects. But that's not usually the case. Many times drugs usually have all kinds of more side effects than just taking just the constituent in the herb. But sometimes they do it for that reason. Also is financial means. You could patent something. You could find a chemical in a certain herb, take it out, add something to it, then you could patent it and keep it for 5 years, and you're the only one that can sell that drug out there and make lots of money on it. So those are the multiple reasons behind why chemists do that. So, how is aspirin being used today compared to how it was used anciently? Many things that we actually use it for today, we actually do use it just like the ancients did, like decreased fevers. We do take aspirin. Probably most people use acetaminophen or ibuprofen, but aspirin is a great anti-fever agent too. It helps decrease pain, inflammation. Take it for a headache, or if you bummed your knee, or if you have chronic inflammation throughout your body, you take it, you feel better, etc. Anciently, they didn't really use it as a blood thinner, even though they did. If you look at the old textbooks, they did use it for blood disorders, but they didn't have a specific name for it. But nowadays, probably most people know aspirin for is low dose aspirin at 80 milligrams helps decrease clotting, right? Even though there's a new research that came out about 5 years ago that's kind of somewhat debunked, that it actually does it does decrease clotting, but it actually does prevent heart attacks long term. But that's what a lot of cardiologists were prescribing for 20 or more years, that you just take 80 milligrams of aspirin and you're going to prevent a heart attack in the future. So those are the main reasons we're using it nowadays. A lot of what we were doing anciently, but a little different. I don't recommend taking 80 milligrams of aspirin to prevent a heart attack because it's increasing your risk of a gastric ulcer, causing some possible kidney damage. And it doesn't seem like it's really helping that much, based on a new review this came out about, I think, 5 years ago. I think most cardiologists are still, it's just their basic go-to thing. They still recommend it, which I don't know why they do, but it's just what they do for helping prevent a heart attack. But the research doesn't support it very strongly. Yeah. So what do I prescribe aspirin for, and do I like it more or less than ibuprofen, acetaminophen, morphine, etc., these other things? So aspirin is really great. It's the more natural of all the drugs out there. So it tends to have fewer side effects. It does tend to be maybe not as strong as the others because it's more natural. So like for a fever, for example, it works well, but it seems like acetaminophen is probably the best anti-fever agent that we have, and that's probably the preference in that regard. For inflammation, aspirin does work well, but ibuprofen is a little bit stronger with that anti-inflammatory action. And if we want really to decrease pain a great deal, morphine is obviously going to be stronger, but morphine comes with all kinds of side effects, addiction profile, etc. So aspirin can be a great alternative there too. Same with ibuprofen, acetaminophen. But ibuprofen and acetaminophen tend to have more side effect profile to them. Ibuprofen's horrible for our kidneys. Acetaminophen's horrible for our liver. Ibuprofen's horrible for our GI tract, same with aspirin, but ibuprofen's a little more potent and affects our gut and causes gastric ulcer more than aspirin. So if I had to go through and take a drug for pain, fever, I would probably try aspirin first. And if it does the trick, great. If not, you have these other options. So let's talk about what is more safe, though, natural willow bark or an aspirin. Usually, taking a herb tends to be a little bit more healthy for you than taking the pure drug. The reason why is we're taking just salicylic acid out of a drug, out of a herb, and putting it into a drug, just that substance. An herb comes with all kinds of other substances that go along with it, and it's not going to be as strong, as potent, and not have as much side effects. In many instances, it can even work just as well as the drug form if you take enough of it, but you don't have as much side effects. So if willow bark does just as well for you to help with a headache or fever or whatever, I would suggest willow bark. And if you take the right dose of willow bark, it does work just as well as aspirin. It's just a little more difficult to use and it's a little more expensive, but it does have less side effects to it. So regarding aspirin or willow bark is more better. Definitely not any type of substance you use. The less you can use, the better, because you use more, the more side effects you're going to have. But obviously, like we just talked about, you could use more of an herb compared to the drug, but you still can definitely overdose on an herb. That's it. So don't take too much of these things. So let's talk about what is the side effect if you do take too much aspirin. The big one, if you take a lot of aspirin, it's going to cause a gastric ulcer and possibly cause you to bleed and possibly even lead to bleeding out. So you need to not be like, oh, I could take as much aspirin as I want. It's a more natural thing. It definitely will cause problems and it will damage your kidneys too if you take it too much and too often. So if you want to get a hold of me and learn more about aspirin or multiple other medical conditions or substances, visit my website, integrativemedica.com. Find my phone number there. Give my receptionist a call. You could also set up an appointment directly online. If you want to learn more about ancient wisdom and how we use it today, click my videos to the right. I'm Dr. Jake. I'll see you there.